evening and welcome to I-24 News Defense, your weekly opportunity to receive a broader perspective on strategic affairs, brought to you in cooperation with Israel Defense magazine. Tonight we take a close look behind the scenes of one of Israel's most successful industries and one of its most best-kept secrets. We'll discuss the tension in the north and check how the U.S. Army is preparing to withdraw from Afghanistan. But before we begin, let's take a look about what else is happening in the world.
We begin off the coast of Virginia, where history was made. An X-47B unmanned combat air system landed and took off from the flight deck of an aircraft carrier. USS George H.W. was the first aircraft carrier to do that. Heading to Paris, where France held its annual Bastille Day parade with a traditional march down Champs-Élysées. Troops from the armies of Mali and Croatia paraded down central Paris, along with thousands of personnel from France's Army, Navy, and Air Force. An aerobatic display team flew overhead, trailing smoke in the colors of the French flag, red, white, and blue. And moving to Panama, Panamanian Marines detained a North Korean-flagged ship from Cuba as it headed to the Panama Canal and said it was hiding weapons in brown sugar containers, sparking a standoff in which the ship's captain attempted to commit suicide. IHS Janes said it had identified the equipment shown in the images as an RSN-75 fan song fire control radar for the SA-2 family of surface-to-air missiles.
Israeli unmanned aerial vehicles industry is considered its biggest export abroad. I-24 News team got a rare access to the manufacturing line of one of Israel's UAV companies, Aeronautics. Here is their report about this growing industry.
It looks like another industrial area outside Tel Aviv. But in fact, it is the manufacturing site of Aeronautics, one of Israel's unmanned aerial vehicle suppliers.
We have a very deep penetration into the UAV market, and we are also operators, developers, manufacturers, and everything around UAVs.
Israel is the biggest exporter of UAVs in the world. Former commander of the Israeli Air Force explains.
We were the first one to bring up the idea and to start this. That's one thing. The other thing, I think that we have the most and the larger experience in the battlefield.
Most of the Israeli UAV operations are kept in the dark, but the market just keeps growing.
The biggest market is Eastern Europe, Africa, and also the Israeli Air Force. We have two different business models. One is we operate a system for the services. Actually, it's on the fly-by-hour business model. And the second one is that we simply sell the airplane. It's also in use for the special forces, for the intelligence units, as well as for the Air Force.
We see a trend of UAVs all over the globe. We have customers in the Americas as well as Europe and Asia. And recently also we are looking to Africa as well. Actually, it's all over the world.
Two other larger UAV suppliers are Elbit Systems, which manufactures the Hermes series, and the Israeli Air Industries, known for its Heron series.
We focus on the tactical and operational level. We are talking about UAVs in the area of 100 kilograms to 1 ton maximum takeoff weight, which can carry payloads up to 400 kilograms. And can stay in the air for a relatively long time, up to 30 hours or so, and a range of a few hundred kilometers.
So how did such a small country become such a UAV empire?
The intensive and the longest period of operating and the experience that we have accumulated in the last 25 years, there is no one in the world who has the same experience as we have.
Joining me in the studio is Nir Salomon from Israel's air industry. Good evening, Nir.
Good evening.
When did Israel start to develop UAVs?
It started basically after the Yom Kippur War. The immediate need for real-time ISR started back then, and IAI was part of the group that started that, and that's when our UAV company started, we're talking 4 decades. So the first operational ISR capability flew in 1981 already.
But in the past 8 years, we exported $4.6 billion worth of UAVs. What makes us the biggest export UAV industry in the world? Is it geography? The fact that we are surrounded by enemies?
I think that, first of all, we're not the biggest in the world. The United States is still doing a lot more business, but that's because they are buying between 50 to 70% of the market. So we're second with that. So, but definitely there's quite a lot of need, and just if in the past we were supplying on the military side, we're talking now UAVs to air forces. You can see today that customers, and we have 50 customers, just UAV customers around the world. It's
so
Air Force, Army, Navy,
France,
Special
Germany.
Forces. Oh, we're selling to all of these.
Africa.
It's the U.S. It's France, Germany, Australia, Spain, Brazil, India, and many other countries. And they today use them in daily operation. Any type of mission going out is supported with a UAV. You
think that in 10, 20 years, they're getting more and more sophisticated. In 10, 20 years, can they substitute living pilots?
I think that when we talk and look into the future, there's no doubt that UAVs will play a more significant role. They already do that. You showed a little bit about the X-47B taking off from a carrier, and these are new things coming to the world. But there's no doubt that we'll see more and more missions conducted by UAVs that are not required to be done by regular manned aircraft. I don't know about passengers yet, but...
Let's talk about the area. We're not alone anymore in developing UAVs. Iran, Lebanon, Turkey is also developing. Will that effect have an impact on us, probably, economically and strategically?
I think that many countries, and you look at most of the countries around the world, they are looking at that market and they want to do things internally. Right. It is easier to do in smaller capabilities when we talk about 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 kilograms, but when you talk about 5 tons of UAV like we have, like the Heron TP, you need to be a sizable company with an aircraft manufacturer.
So no worries in the next few years. Nir Salomon, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And now for living pilots, the Harrier is one of the British Royal Air Force best-known aircraft, mainly for its capability of vertical takeoff and landing. British pilot Jim Schofield went on a journey to test the American version, the F-35B. Here are his reflections for the experience.
My name is Squadron Leader Jim Schofield. I'm from the UK's Royal Air Force. My frontline type was the Harrier back in the UK. And then after test pilot training, I went on to instruct on the test pilot school. F-35 has revolutionized STOVL operations compared with legacy types such as Harrier. The pilot has a STOVL button in the cockpit. He just needs to push that and the aircraft transforms behind him. In that mode, the aircraft is capable of taking off and hovering automatically, so requires very little, if any, input from the pilot, which makes it safer and it requires less training for pilots. Compared to when I first vertically landed the Harrier, that was a very strange sensation. All through training you're told, never get low and slow. But in the Harrier you're getting slower and slower, and you're having to power up on the throttle to keep it at level. In F-35, once you push the STOVL button, you really just point at the hover pad, and you bring the throttle back to decelerate the aircraft, and the automatics then take care of the rest. So it's a much more controlled environment than in legacy types. It distracts you much less. Both UK and Marine pilots will be operating F-35Bs from Queen Elizabeth class and from LHD class aircraft carriers, so obviously STOVL is essential to operate F-35 from those platforms. A big milestone event for the UK is the stand-up of its operational test squadron out at Edwards Air Force Base in California towards the middle of 2014. The UK are very excited about being able to test these jets in an operational construct. Future pilots are going to love this aircraft. I remember when I flew Harrier, a lot of the sortie I was worrying about the landing, be it in the woods to a hover pad or back to an aircraft carrier. With this jet, pilots will need to carry out much less training with respect to STOVL operations. So that means they can spend much more of the time either in the aircraft or in the simulator practicing warfighting, which are the skills they really need to be on top of, particularly in a jet that can do so much compared with legacy types.
With more sporadic shootings of mortar bombs on the Golan Heights and threats from Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, Israeli army is on high alert. I-24 News correspondent Maxime Perez followed the forces as they prepare to the next conflict. Let's watch.
What you see is only a drill, but here's how the Israeli army gets ready for the next war. In this base, located in northern Israel, a typical Lebanese village has been built, and the soldiers play the game. The urban warfare remains a difficult art for the Israeli infantry troops. Snipers, booby traps, suicide bombers, the danger lurks around every corner. During the Lebanon War in 2006, Israeli soldiers advanced by foot, sometimes through the brushwood. Hezbollah militants hid their arms in this landscape: rockets, missiles, inside the tunnels. Thousands of them are scattered in southern Lebanon, according to the Israeli army. It's a vast underground network which enables Hezbollah fighters to move undetected. For the Israeli army, any victory requires a quick uptake of these tunnels. Meanwhile, Israel increases vigilance at its northern border. Soldiers patrol day and night, like these Bedouin trackers for whom every trace left by visitors provides information. Majdi, a Negev native, has been roaming the blue line separating Israel from Lebanon for a long time. Over the last 7 years, he and his men have had no clashes with the Hezbollah.
The area is quiet. It's been 7 years that it lasts. We feel it both in our side and their side. We are ready to respond to any surprise incident, but we can't know where it would lead us.
The lieutenant colonel takes us into one of the observation points along the Lebanese border. He says the blows inflicted on Hezbollah in 2006 have deterred it from launching a new military campaign against Israel since. He also thinks that the situation in Syria has something to do with it.
When we see the number of its fighters being killed in Syria because the Hezbollah is present all over the fronts, no doubt it affects military capacities in Lebanon.
Syria and Lebanon are now two parts of the same front. For now, the Israeli army stands by as a vigilant observer. It likely knows that calm never lasts too long in the Middle East, and it always precedes the storm.
Joining me now for this next discussion is the Haaretz senior military analyst Amos Harel. Good evening, Amos.
Good evening, Amos.
We spoke here on the show about the aerial weapons and just watched the ground drills in preparations for the next conflict. Will the next conflict be an aerial one, or should we focus still on the ground?
There's an ongoing debate inside the IDF which direction should they be going. And now there's a tendency to emphasize both intelligence gathering and the Air Force, spending more and more money. This is the reform that the Chief of Staff, Benny Gantz, is trying to move forward right now. There are many generals, especially among the ground forces, who are saying that this is very dangerous, that Israel is losing some of its capabilities, and in the end it might be tempted to only use the Air Force and the intelligence without actually applying boots on the ground.
But maybe the generals that are on the ground doesn't see the bigger picture.
I think the politicians see the bigger picture, and there is a growing sensitivity among the Israeli public about losses, about casualties in the army. What some of the generals are claiming is that it's taking it too far, and that in the end you'll always need the soldiers deployed inside enemy territory, like Lebanon or Syria, to finalize the fight and to actually reach a decisive victory.
Where does the expert estimate will be the next conflict?
It's very hard to tell. It's very different from the way it was 10 years ago. We used to speak of a single conflict, either the Second Intifada, the war in Lebanon, and so on. Now there are 5 or 6 different frontiers. It's Lebanon, Syria, possibly Sinai, the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians. I don't think anybody really knows. I think Israel is keeping a close watch, mostly on Lebanon and Syria. And if I have to bet, it is probably the most likeliest possibility.
In the near future?
Hopefully not.
But estimations?
It doesn't seem so. I think we talked about that in the past. There's no clear interest, neither on Hezbollah's part or our own, to reach a direct conflict.
Right. So,
both sides were burned by the latest conflict in 2006 and perhaps would prefer to avoid it.
Let's stay on that high note. Thank you very much, Amos Harel. That is all for tonight. Be sure to catch us next week for another edition of I-24 News Defense. To keep up with the news, log on to www.i24news.tv. Have a safe night from Jaffa Port. Good night.